We're talking about something that you took for granted that's now being snatched away from you right under your eyes, and that's freedom of speech. What you don't realize is that under this sleeper cell in the White House, virtually every one of the freedoms that you assumed was yours by your birthright is under assault. And isn't it interesting? Isn't it interesting that this assault upon your very freedoms themselves is coming not from the right wing that you feared it would come from? Oh, your whole life you were told, oh, watch out for those right-wingers. Those right-wingers, they'll take away your freedom of speech. Those right-wingers will tell you what art you can produce. Yeah, all of the fears you had were valid, but you see, when you have a damaged optic chiasma, you see everything upside down and backwards, which is why liberalism is a dangerous mental disorder. Now, I realize this might be offensive to liberals, but unfortunately it's true. It's a correct diagnosis from Doc Savage, and we're specifically now talking about the assault upon free speech by radical Muslims as exemplified in their murderous assault in Paris last week. And yet we wake up today and we see a continuation of this in the form of a statement by Pope Francis aboard the papal plane saying that there should be limits on free speech, that if it's offensive you can get punched in the nose. Now, he does it in a homey, folksy way. And he doesn't really understand, I don't think, that we have a First Amendment in America, nor does he care. He is such a close ally of Barack Obama that I feel he actually believes there should be a limit on free speech. And we're talking about this kind of papal ignorance versus free speech on the Savage Nation and other topics. He also has come out as an expert on climate change, a topic of which he knows nothing so far as I can tell. He has no background in science. He's never read a scientific paper. And as I said last time, in the piece I did called Lenin's Pope and the Secret History of Global Warming, which was 2 weeks ago, he now comes out and says that this is the biggest deal on earth and that we got to protect God's creation, blah, blah, blah. So my feeling on that is the only thing the Pope knows about climate is that when it rains, his aides open umbrellas for him. But bigger than that is the issue of the separation of church and state. When did the Catholic Church become so brazen as to suddenly step over that very, very, very deep firewall? Well, I'll tell you when they started and when they got away with it. When the Catholic Church was given billions of dollars by the federal government to help usher in millions and millions of illegal aliens because they need the pews filled with illiterates from Central America, that's when it happened. Once the Catholic Church and Baptist Family Services and certain Jewish organizations and certain Protestant organizations were compromised by Obama with billions of dollars in taxpayer-funded resettlement programs, the churches, the synagogues, etc., became useless institutions of religion and instead became arms of the community organizer, Barack Obama. That's a full paragraph. Write down every word and see how good it is. Back in 1989, there was an article by Leonard Peikoff that first appeared in the New York Times about this issue, and it was called Religious Terrorism versus Free Speech. It's one paragraph, and it was during the period after Ayatollah Khomeini's attack on Salman Rushdie. Remember that? And the government did nothing to protect him. Well, he wrote this: a religious motive does not excuse murder. It makes the crime more dangerous. It took the West centuries to move from medieval mysticism to the Enlightenment and thereby discover the only safeguard against endless, bloody, religious warfare is the recognition of man's inalienable right to think and speak as he chooses. Civilization depends on reason. Freedom means the freedom to think, then act accordingly. The rights of free speech and a free press implement the sovereignty of reason over brute force. If civilized existence is to be possible, the right of the individual to exercise his rational faculty must be inviolable. I know a lot about freedom of speech because I'm the only member of the American media, Michael Savage, who was not permitted to enter Britain based upon statements that I never even made. So believe me, I know all about this subject. And I know that we are facing a religious terrorism in the form of these imams. I get that. But did you ever think it would also come from the Pope in your lifetime? I didn't. I didn't at all. And yet it did. Mr. Peikoff went on to quote Ayn Rand, one of the great philosophers of recent times, and she was talking about the assault on free speech. And he says, as Ayn Rand wrote in Philosophy, Who Needs It, in her prescient 1960 essay, Faith and Force, The Destroyers of the Modern World, it's one paragraph. Ayn Rand wrote, the conflict of reason versus mysticism is the issue of life or death, or freedom or slavery, or progress or stagnant brutality. Reason is the only objective means of communication and of understanding among men. When men deal with one another by means of reason, reality is their objective standard and frame of reference. But when men claim to possess supernatural means of knowledge, no persuasion, communication, or understanding is possible. So in this regard, it's quite understandable that the Pope would join imams in saying there should be limitations on free speech. Don't you think?